What's going on, everyone? Welcome to another edition of the Athlete's Wisdom Podcast. Today, I have an amazing guest. She is an NCAA champion. She is the Big Ten Medal of Honor winner. I could honestly go down a list literally of all of her accomplishments in such a short period of time. But I have an amazing guest, Siera Brooks, who is a gymnast at the University of Michigan. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing well. I just want to thank you for taking the time to join the podcast and being able to talk to this audience and sharing your experience.
Yes, of course. I'm excited.
So before we really delve into, the meat and potatoes of things, all the good information, I did just kind of want to, ask yourself to just explain yourself to the audience for the people who might not be familiar with you, just so they can get to know a little bit more about who Siera Brooks is.
High level overview. I'm a gymnast, like you said, University of Michigan. I just graduated, so I'm taking my 5th year this upcoming season. So I'm actually pursuing my master's in business analytics, which I'm super excited about. And then I'm also from suburbs of Chicago. I've done gymnastics since I was 3, and I'm just really passionate about learning and education and also leadership.
First off, go Chi-Town.
Yes.
My mom's from Chicago. I literally just got back there like 2 days ago. So that's
really?
Great. Yeah.
No, my parents moved. My parents moved to suburbs in Nashville now, so I don't get to go as often as I would like, but loved it.
I'm sure it's not bad when you go during Christmas time. It's not icy cold anymore, or as icy as it would be in Chicago. But
definitely.
So I'm just going to really delve into it. So I know that you're obviously a gymnast. And as I was listening to one of your podcasts, I heard that you were what's called a level 10 gymnast pretty early on. So can you just kind of explain what a level 10 gymnast is and how you were able to just be able to do that at a younger age?
Yeah. Yep. So we call it JO gymnastics. It's like club gymnastics, junior Olympic gymnastics. It's what we do prior to college gymnastics if we don't go the elite route, which is like trying to go for the Olympics or compete internationally. And that was something that I never wanted to do. So I started competing. I think I started at level 4 when I was around age 8. And then you have this thing where you can skip levels. So I went from level 4 to 6, competed 7, skipped 8, and then competed 9, and then went to level 10. So it was a mix of just having really good coaches, and not necessarily coaches who were super technical, but coaches who were able to see my talent from a young age and kind of encourage me to learn skills earlier than some of my other teammates might have. And I think that was kind of what I would say definitely propelled me to level 10 really early. It was never a thing where I was like, I want to be a level 10 at X age. It was kind of just coincidentally, that's what ended up working for me. And my coach had a big stress too, where he was like, gymnastics is scary. It's really good to get gymnasts to learn as many skills as they can before they start to think it through and develop those different mental setbacks and just those fears. So I think that was another reason I ended up where I was at such a young age.
So being able to compete at a higher level, were there any challenges that you faced early on? Because I'm sure that there was a different age group that you were into. What was the age difference and how did you overcome some of those challenges?
Yes, that's definitely something that I faced being a level 10 at a young age. So you train with girls who are around the same levels as you. So most of my teammates were, in high school, and I was a very young 6th grader. So I think that age gap it was definitely a challenge to just kind of develop those super strong bonds when you have that much of an age gap. Yes, nobody's in college, everyone's young, but there is a difference in maturity and the things that you're talking about. So I found that hard, but I just also had teammates and friends who were in potentially lower levels than me, but I was still pretty close to them because we were the same age. And it also was really good because at some point early on in level 10, I had a teammate come from a different gym who I didn't know her. And then we ended up being best friends, and we were the same age. And it was kind of I had my little sidekick. And I think that was really, really transformational for me because I learned what it was like to have a true teammate who was my age, who was excited for me. I was excited for them. And I think it made that transition better. And also we were able to grow as leaders together because we had these older gymnasts in the gym who may or may not have been the role models that we wanted, but we wanted to make sure as we got older, we were helping cultivate these good relationships with the younger girls who might have felt super young and might have felt kind of ostracized because of their age, because at some point we were those same gymnasts.
So in becoming a leader, as you got older and you're being able to become a leader to some other people on your team, how did it feel to have people look up to you in that way? And what kind of responsibility does that put on you?
Yeah. I'd say it's definitely a good feeling. I think most people would agree that they like it when people look to them for advice or just for mentorship. But like you said, it does come with a lot of responsibility. So I think knowing that I was in this role definitely helped me like in various like decision making moments in my life when you're like, okay, I'm feeling tempted to do this, but I should probably do this. I was more likely to do the thing that was more responsible or gonna set me up for success because I knew other people were looking my way and that I was kind of the I don't know what I would call it, but I was just kind of like the reference point. Like, okay, if Siera did this, and like I should probably do this too. Or if Sierra's conditioning and not cheating on numbers and doing like the full thing, then I should do that too. But I knew that if I went the other way, then it was also going to kind of bring people down with me. So it is a role where you put a lot of responsibility on yourself. And then if you really take in that responsibility, you're okay with kind of making those decisions because you know it's going to benefit everyone else too.
I like that. I like that. So correct me if I'm wrong. In gymnastics, can someone win an individual award and a team award?
Yes. Yeah. So you can do that both in college and like JO gymnastics. So growing up, it's like you have your meets and we're a team. It's like you compete under your team umbrella, but you're not necessarily like a huge team sport. It's not like somebody else, like somebody competes vault, somebody else competes bars. And it's like you add the scores together and that's like the only awards. A lot of it's individual, like 85% of awards at the end of a gymnastics meet are individual where you place the top 5 people on each event and then all around. And then you have the separate team awards. So you can do well individually and then also have a good team output too. But there's a lot less of a stress on the team output before college.
So playing in a sport like that, right? Because oftentimes I speak with athletes and, most sports in the college athletics are tend to be team sports, right? So dealing with the type of sport that you're in, and it's not that much of pressure to perform for the team, but you're still able to get the team feel. How does that help you in performing? Does it give you a boost? Does it make it a bit more relaxing and calm mentally, or do you kind of like having, just the opportunity to do it all yourself?
Yeah, that's a great question and something I don't think I could really wrap my head around till I came to college gymnastics because like I said, it's a huge stress on your team itself and how your team does. Like, yes, once again, we have individual awards, but they are not like the highlight. Like we want to win the meet, we want to do well in the rankings, and we also want to keep competing because when you get to the end of postseason, you have to win as a team in order to move on. So I think once I was in this environment and finally like locked in and understood that like my individual performance was helping or hindering the team in some way, it actually did make me a lot more relaxed as a competitor. Because I remember prior to college, whenever I had a gymnastics meet, I was full of anxiety, full of nerves. Like I was never like, yay, it's time for a meet. I was always like, oh, dang it. Like it's another meet week. And I loved the sport. Like it was never anything like in gymnastics itself, but it was just kind of stressful. We weren't used to it. They weren't as frequent. It did feel very much like you were competing by yourself. You're like, oh, I need to do well so I can get recruited or so my college coaches still want me. So it was a lot of pressure just only on yourself. And then coming into college gymnastics, it's definitely dispersed. You start to look at things a little bit differently. You start to not blame yourself in the same way. Like, for instance, we talk about it all the time. Like, if I have a teammate, they go and compete and they fall. It's not something where I look at them and I'm like, this is your fault. Like, you went wrong here. It's more like, okay, like, don't stress yourself out. Like, we're more worried on, like, making sure that they're okay. And then we're like, the rest of us will take care of it. So now when I go and I have meets, I get actually excited for them because I'm like, let's see how well our team can do. Like, I'm excited to see how everyone does. It's not just me this time. Like, nothing's riding all on my back. It's definitely like dispersed. We have leaders and we're just excited to like see what we can do.
So how long have you been doing gymnastics and what originally got you into it?
Yeah, I've been doing gymnastics since I was 3. So a really long time before I can even remember getting started. And the reason I was put in gymnastics is because I was a super busy child and would climb on furniture and all those things. So I think it was my aunt actually told my parents to put me in gymnastics. She was like, she's busy, like put her somewhere where it's like actually safe to do those things. So they put me in gymnastics classes, I think starting with like parent taught classes where it's like you see a ton of little kids and like their mom and they're just like walking on beams and very intro level gymnastics. But that's when I started and I definitely liked it more than some other sports that I had been in. Like I'd done swimming and dancing around that same time and definitely didn't enjoy going to those practices as much as gymnastics.
So I'm glad you mentioned that you, at some point in time, did do other sports. Although you didn't particularly care for those sports, did you still play any other sports recreationally to help keep your body fit, say during the off season of gymnastics? Or were you always mainly focused on just training and doing the things in the gymnastics field?
Yeah, it was definitely the latter. And it's just kind of how the gymnastics culture is and just what the expectations are of coaches and everything like that. Because we really don't have an off season. And I feel like prior to COVID, there was always like this mentality where it was like, if you miss a week of practice, like you're going to be so set back, like your skills aren't going to be as good, like your technique, everything like that is kind of digress. You're going to be out of shape. So we train all year round and it's training for gymnastics. It's not ever kind of, okay, I'm going to take a couple of months off and like work on this skill and get in shape. Because I think to me, being in shape as an athlete and like being in shape as a gymnast are very different. Mm-hmm. There's been times where I'm like definitely in gymnastics shape. Like my routines are easy, like they're clicking. But if I had to go like run or do something like that, I just wouldn't feel the same. So yeah, growing up, I was definitely a gymnastics focus. Like in the summer, you're just working on like making your skills that much better, learning new skills, things like that, rather than taking your focus off and doing something else.
So I see why you have all of these accolades at this point. You're 20, what, 3?
21.
21? Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So you've done 18 years basically of consistent training in gymnastics, of getting better and better and better. So your first like award where you're like, wow, like I really did this?
That's a good question. I feel like it's hard because we grew up doing so many meets just like every single year. And I think there were moments where I like, oh yeah, like I placed like first or second in state and like that was super cool. But I don't think it started to click that I was like really good at the sport, honestly, till like second year of level 10. Like I made nationals first alternate, like as a level 10 my first year. And then like the second year I made it. And it was like hearing from other people how big of an accomplishment it was to make nationals that like kind of made it resonate for me, where they were like, okay, all these people are telling me that this is like a really huge step, and to do it at this age is like a huge accomplishment. So I think that was an accomplishment that I value a lot to this day. And also just going there and like having that experience at such a young age was amazing. You get to see like a long wall of college coaches there, and like everyone's in these Leos that represent their region. So it just made gymnastics feel a lot bigger than it was. And I think prior to that point, it had just like always been this fun thing. And it was like, yeah, like I'm winning meets, but like, that's cool. Like it just ended there.
So when you first realized, you're like, okay, I'm actually really good at this. This can be something. What kind of motivation did that push you? Like, did you say right then and there, I want to be a college gymnast, or I want to be a professional gymnast, or I want to go to the Olympics? Or did you just say, I'm just going to make the decision to see where this goes? How did your mindset shift once you realized that you were actually extremely good and talented in the sport?
Yeah, I'd say it probably just made me more competitive. I've been extremely competitive my entire life, but I think at that point, being competitive and like the certain goals that I was looking for felt more attainable. So I think at that point I had known for a while now that I wanted to do college gymnastics since a pretty young age. Like I love school almost even more than gymnastics. So I knew that that was something that I definitely prioritized. Like I knew I wanted to do college gymnastics, not elite gymnastics, not the Olympics. So that didn't necessarily shift, but I knew that I wanted to compete with some of these other girls and athletes. Like I had heard their names. I knew they had been dominating and killing it. And I was like, okay, I want to be up there too. So it made me more competitive, almost against myself, where I was like, okay, I'm going to work harder. I'm going to have this list in the beginning of summer. Like these are all the things that I want to work on. So I feel like I was just more intentional as an athlete as a whole once I kind of wrapped my head around all that I was capable of doing.
So being able to not only obviously compete at a high level, but then just to continuously get better and better. And then obviously you get to the point where now you're in college and winning championships, right? How did it feel to be able to win an actual NCAA championship doing that?
Yeah, that was insane. I think still to this day, like we think back to that year and like it's an incredible feeling. I don't think I came into college when I committed to Michigan, like I was never like, I'm going to this school to win like an NCAA championship. I just was like, I want to continue doing as well as I was doing and improve and just like enjoy doing gymnastics while getting a good education. Like if we do well, we do well. But it wasn't like everything was just riding on us winning an NCAA championship. And I think that's why it's such like a sweet memory, because we were enjoying what we were doing. Not everything was riding on that championship, but then also just being able to look at it now. And I'm like, okay, as a sophomore, like I was on a team that helps bring home like the first NCAA title for our program in history, just like point blank, and the conference. So I think it's just a huge accomplishment. Definitely something that, not that I like didn't think it would happen, but it was never something that I like had as the end all be all. And I'm incredibly fortunate that I was there for that and that I was able to be such a strong contributor for that meet, because it's something that not many people get to say. Like it's amazing to be be like, oh yeah, like our team won the NCAA title. Like, not that we came second, like we actually won it. We have like movie night sometimes and we'll like watch the meet. So definitely a highlight. Like, yeah, super cool.
And you all won the championship in 2021, correct?
Yes, yeah.
And then the very next year, you were Big Ten Gymnast of the Year.
Yes.
So how did that kind of feel to not only you win the championship one year, and then the very next year, you're essentially best gymnast in your conference, and the Big Ten is a very good conference, in my opinion. Behind SEC, I'm in Georgia. So
Right.
But honestly, Big Ten is one of the most powerful conferences when it comes to a wide range of sports. So how did it feel to essentially like, all right, it's a team win this year. We did it all together to the very next year, kind of like you said, 85% of, the awards in, our individual awards. So how did it feel to kind of be like, I'm up here, especially with your competitive nature?
That was incredibly rewarding because I think like freshman year, I won Big Ten Freshman of the Year, which typically it's like it's just like our meet averages or scores that they take into account to give us those various awards. So like being Big Ten Freshman of the Year, that was super cool, especially after that season was cut short. So it was still really nice to get that like recognition in the middle of the summer, in the middle of the pandemic, and kind of get that pat on the back that I had a successful intro to college gymnastics. And then I think, like you said, in 2022, getting Big Ten Gymnast of the Year, that was very rewarding because it was something that I didn't have like my eyes set on. I had known about it. Like I had known prior gymnasts that had gotten it and I thought it was super cool. And then once it came together where I was like, wait, that was me. Like I was the gymnast who had like the highest all around score or whatever throughout the season. I think that was when it clicked for me at that point where I was like, okay, like you're a really big contributor. You've been really consistent. And I think it's good to kind of have that pat on the back at that point in season 2, because at that point you're transitioning from regular season to postseason and you still kind of have a lot to go. We've had a lot of meets. There's a lot to reflect on. You've gotten a lot done because our season kind of just starts and ends. It goes by so fast. So
I want to pivot a little bit into how you've seen college sports change in regards to NIL, right? Obviously, when you first started college, NIL wasn't into effect. Now, obviously, at this point, it's been into effect for about 2 years. So how has the shift been for you in regards to NIL? How has it impacted, just your college athletic career, maybe just your college career as a student as well? Yeah. Pros and cons of some of those things. NIL, it is weird because it was like quite literally in the middle of my college career when that switched, like randomly July 1st. But I'd say one way that it's just changed is obviously like it's just always part of the conversation. Like we've seen NIL impact recruiting. We've seen it impact just so much of what like the day-to-day looks like. We have a huge focus now within Michigan athletics, like on building our brands and using our socials to the best that we can do and everything along those lines. So it's just something that's new and it's something that's big as well. And I'd say one thing that's not necessarily a pro or a con, but it's time consuming. Like that's one of the biggest things that I've noticed since NIL has appeared. I think every student athlete kind of has this pressure to build their brand or like get working with these companies when that pressure used to like never exist. So that's one thing where student athletes have to really decide like how much time am I putting towards NIL? Like what are my goals? Because sometimes you see people making X amount of money because they grew their brand to X amount of followers and you're like, that's super cool. But then it's like you need to step back and recognize, okay, like, do I actually want to spend that much time doing content creation? Am I even interested in what they're doing? So it's a lot more comparison, I would say, from student athlete to student athlete or school to school in terms of what they're doing in NIL. And like I said, that can be good and bad. It's made student athletes more creative. They've learned a lot. I think that's a pro from NIL, like the focus on taxes, the focus on just even these technical skills, like on our phones, like what you can do. So student athletes are definitely learning a lot from this. It doesn't also come with monetary anything. So whatever that looks like. And then, like you said, there are some where you do get like a percentage of sales. I haven't done many where I sell something or I post something and I have a code and I get a percentage of sales, but I have been in conversation with a company recently where we get equity. And I think that's really interesting because it's, once again, giving me an avenue as a student athlete to learn more. Like some people might look at that as finance and like, okay, like what is equity? What am I dealing with here? Equity, in my opinion, is probably one of the best things a company can offer you. It's not always guaranteed, obviously, but if you just get 1% of a company, and let's just say in 5 years, that company goes from being worth $100,000 to being worth $10 million. 1% of $10 million is $1,000. So you just. Yep. So I was like, that's definitely something that intrigues me. And I've continued having that conversation because it's a really cool opportunity. And it's not what you're seeing most often. Like most companies are not offering equity at all. Most of the time it's, okay, our budget
how much do you charge? If you're within that, then they're willing to move forward, and then that's it. So it is really cool seeing the equity aspect come into play.
So technically, to be considered an influencer on social media, you have to have 10,000 followers or more. So when NIL started, you were kind of already in that quote unquote influencer status. And since then, of course, you've only grown in following to what I think it's at like a little over 98,000 right now, almost 100K.
Yeah, it's like
so
90. I don't know. 90.
For you personally, how have you been able to, determine your value when it comes to a lot of these NIL deals, right? Because somebody who has a smaller following might not obviously be able to command as much as you do with a larger audience and a higher engagement rate. So how do you determine your value when it comes to NIL?
That's a good question. And I feel like it's something I'm still figuring out. I'd say in the beginning is I do have an agent. So they were really helpful and sometimes giving me like a ballpark where I'm like, okay, this person came to me. This is how much like they propose. And then they would kind of navigate me and be like, oh, with this, I think we could go higher or whatever that looks like. Or, okay, if they're only going to pay you this much, maybe instead of 3 story posts, let's do 2. So I think that helps me learn a lot about kind of what I should charge or what I should look for. And I also just focus a lot too on like, what's the time commitment? Because some things seem like they're not going to take a lot of time. They actually do. So just looking at those aspects, but just in terms of valuing myself, it was a lot of help with my agent. And then also just like thinking about like myself where I'm like, okay, at what point am I doing this? At what point am I not? And then also just, even though I went to the NIL summit pretty recently and they were like always ask for more. And I think that's something that I've struggled with too, because I'm like, okay, I'm thinking I can do this and I'll ask them for that. And they're like, okay, that sounds good. And I'm like, maybe I should have asked for more. Like I could have asked for more. It's just kind of getting out of your comfort zone and negotiating and things like that, which once again is something that we as student athletes would have zero experience with if it wasn't for NIL. So long story short, still figuring it out, but also just talking and seeing what other people are charging. There's also a lot of data just found online. If you look at your following and your engagement, you're able to kind of piece together those aspects and then add in the personal things that are only specific to you.
Yeah, there are some tools that I found out that you can essentially type in somebody's social media handle and it gives you the estimated amount that they make per post. So that's kind of like the same thing that you can do as far as like charging your own. Like you can look up your own social media and it could essentially tell you the estimated amount that you could make per post. So if you're doing, say, a 5 post or 2 posts or, however many posts for a company, you're like, okay, well, if it says I can make $1,000 per post and they want 5 posts, let me go ahead and ask them for 10,000 because they're going to make obviously way more money if you're able to. But that's just, an example. But I do want to ask you, right? So I've spoken to a decent amount of athletes in regards to NIL and how they've been able to acquire it. Some use marketplaces, some reach out on their own, and some have agents. So how were you able to find your agent? How were you able to get one? Like, what was that process for you? And what are some of the things that they help you with? Like, what's the pros and cons of essentially of having an agent?
Yeah. So I'd say one thing is I really like kind of like the relationship my agent and I have in the sense where like if deals come straight to me and I feel comfortable with it, I'm able to like sign off, everything like that. They don't necessarily like get a cut of that. But if they're bringing different deals to me, then that's when like you go into the whole breakdown of like they get 15% or 20% or whatever that looks like. So I think that's been incredibly helpful because I found a lot of deals have come straight to me through DMs or my email or whatever that looks like. And I've been able to keep most of that, but also make sure things are like legally safe for me through using like their communication and reaching out and just being like, okay, is there anything that is a red flag? So that's been good. But in terms of the process of finding an agent, my agent was pretty familiar with representing gymnasts that had competed like at the Olympics or just internationally and things like that. So that's how we ended up getting in contact, was just through people that she had previously represented, and hopped on a couple of calls. It sounded good. I think my parents were also involved at this point because this was at, I'd say like the latter end of 2021, and then made a decision from there. So it was not the most difficult process. I would also say this was because it was earlier on. I didn't know about many other agents in the space. Like I've grown to see more that like other athletes are using and things like that. So it was very much like, okay, like I know about this one. This one seems like a good fit. Like I'm comfortable moving forward. I feel that they have a lot of expertise, not necessarily in NIL, but just in representing athletes for however many years. So that's how I ended up doing that. And I'd say the pros is there's always somebody to look over contracts to give you a different perspective on all the legal aspects that we probably don't understand or know how to really read in between the lines or understand. And then cons, it's another person involved. Sometimes it can slow things down. Sometimes you have to you're like, you as the athlete, you're like, okay, I'm actually okay with getting paid this much. And like, I don't think you should. So you can end up with kind of those like smaller things that add more time, might not make the process as smooth. You might feel like you're a little bit less in control, but I don't have too many cons with the process. It really just depends on the person too. And if they feel like they can manage their NIL deals. Because if you're getting a ton, like it's easier to pass it on to somebody else.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned something kind of twice, right? Earlier when you were speaking about the NIL summit, and I did want to get to that in a moment, you said how they kind of helped speak about taxes. And then you were saying with your agent, they help you utilize tools that can kind of go over the contracts and things as well. So just kind of explain a little bit about the tax part and the contract part of NIL and just some things that the athletes, that are watching this can pay attention to when looking at their next NIL deal.
Yeah. I'd say just starting with taxes, this is one thing that even I would say Michigan has done a good job with, and like tools wise, we use Influencer. Our whole school has access to Influencer, and there's a very easy way to disclose your deals. Like you just go on, you say the name of it, how much you were paid, or if it was products or what that looked like, and then it saves. And then when it's time for taxes, you're able to pull up your Influencer app, like check your history of all the transactions you've had, and that makes it a lot easier to file taxes. And I've had like my mom still helps me with my taxes, and like she's asking, and I'm able to just, okay, like here's my screenshot, or like send a PDF of like what deals I had done in the past. So that's been really helpful, where I'm able to bring everything together, have it in one place, not go through my own socials trying to figure out like, wait, I did this with what company and how much was I paid. Instead, you have it all in a central location. So that's been helpful. And I think we've had a lot of stress from various people, like Michigan, our agents, everyone else, like I said, at the NIL summit, where it's just like, file your taxes. I think NIL is super cool, but you can end up in a lot of trouble if you're just negligent about that aspect of it. Like you don't get to keep all of the money.
Exactly.
That's the one piece there with taxes. And then contracts. Contracts has been interesting because I've been able to like learn or look for certain pieces of information in contracts myself. Once again, this is something that like my agent was able to walk me through in the beginning, and then now I'm able to look out for it. But it's just like, how long are they using your name, image, and likeness? I remember this early in 2021 when NIL first happened. People were signing off for like indefinite use of their NIL, which is really upsetting, and just something where companies are taking advantage of student athletes. So every contract I have, I look for that. That's like one of the biggest pieces that I look for. And then just kind of reading between the lines, getting detailed. Don't think of it as like terms and conditions where it's always like, agree, sounds good. You actually want to make sure you're advocating for yourself. So like I said, agents have been really good with that aspect of it. And then even here in Michigan, we have NIL clinic students. So these are students who are in our law school, and we're able to pass on contracts to them too. And they'll do the same thing. They won't negotiate for us, but they will just basically give us the green or red light where it's like, okay, you're protected. It looks good. I don't see anything that should make you weary of moving forward.
I like that. So one thing that, being a business owner and hearing this from an athlete, it kind of lit a light bulb in my head. And one thing that I feel like not a lot of college athletes either know about or are utilizing is the fact that you can start your own business under whatever, right? Even if it's you just take your name and put it as an LLC. That's a whole different hack in itself that for the people who are watching, look up the benefits of putting your own name in an LLC, right? Like Siera Brooks LLC or Alexander Turner LLC. But especially in this NIL space, right? And owning your own intellectual property and having control of a lot of these things. Do you have a business in which they pay your NIL through? Or do you know of people who do that and why that's beneficial?
Yeah, so I personally haven't. I've looked into what you just talked about with the LLC, with doing my name LLC. It's honestly been something I haven't moved forward with just because of a lack of time and having other priorities, and haven't gotten around to it. But I do know some other people who, once again, have LLCs just with their name in front of it. And it's very helpful with, I know taxes is a large part of it because it operates very differently than if you're just getting paid as an individual. So that's a benefit too. You get to keep more of what you're bringing in. And it also, I think, is just helpful, in my opinion. It is just like learning experience. You kind of get the experience of like what these different business organizations look like and how that impacts almost everything that you do, and just kind of how that money comes in.
So I feel like I missed part of it. You said you did or you don't have a business?
I don't, but I know other people who do.
Okay. Now, I know you went to school for business. and you're currently in for business analytics, correct?
Yes.
So what is your goal as far as what you would do with that?
With which part specifically?
With the majors, your undergrad major
business.
and your master's major. Do you want to start your own business? Do you want to like join a company and help them grow in areas? What's your goal?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think still figuring it out as I go, but biggest thing is I do want to start my own business at some point. I know that I am not in the place where I like know what that would exactly look like right now. So I think that's something that's pushed a little far out, but I know that's something that I definitely do want to do at some point. And then just post college and looking at like the next couple of years or so, I think I'm going to go work for a company or potentially in consulting. But I'm hoping this next year will be really revealing, but trying to use data and analytics and also apply these to various fields. Like, for instance, I like sports. I don't love sports themselves, but I like the business of sports. So it'd be cool to kind of use the business analytics background and apply that to sports or apply that to various industries and companies. So that's one thing I'm looking into. And then also one that's a little bit more unique is I also love academia. So I would like to go and be a professor at some point, which would require me getting my PhD in something. So I'd have to figure that out. But that's also a long-term goal where I would love to just get back in higher education and teach.
I love that. I love that. Speaking of education, and I know you obviously go to a bigger school, so it is probably something that they have more of, but do they have any resources or tools to help educate you all on NIL and the ins and outs of NIL and how to maneuver through it?
Yes, I think they're growing every single year, and I think Michigan has done a good job of making NIL a priority, like increasingly as time has gone on, especially considering like it was a hard transition for the school and many other schools when that decision was made because they didn't kind of have the infrastructure in place. But we do have good NIL education. I think a lot of it is like, I've talked about it before, but just like growing our brands, marketing, things like that. We have access to a really good business school with really good marketing professors, and we've had them come in and talk to student athletes. And then we also have people internal to our athletic department who have a lot of expertise in that area, whether that be digitally or just with like the technical skills with content creation and what that looks like and what's the easiest way to go about that. So we have had a lot of education on NIL, and I think that's been helpful. And then we also have access to things like the NIL Summit. Like Michigan brought 10 student athletes there who were able to have these takeaways and then bring these home and share them with other student athletes.
You were referring to the NIL Summit just now?
Yes.
Perfect transition, because I actually want to ask you about your experience on that. And were you able to go to the first inaugural one, or did you just go to the most recent one?
Just the second one.
How was that experience for you, and what are some of the things that you were able to learn at the NIL Summit that you're going to start implementing into your NIL journey?
Yeah, it was a really cool just event to be a part of, and I'm glad that I was able to go. A lot of the focus, or I don't even know, there was a long agenda, there was various sessions, and there were a lot of panels, and the panels were super cool because there were student athletes sitting on these panels talking about like what their various strategies were. And it was also interesting to hear them talk about how much work NIL was. And I think that was something that was good for me to hear too, because there's been times where I'm like, why am I stressed about like creating a video that like potentially won't even be like a branded video? Like, I need to grow my brand, and you kind of sometimes get really wrapped up and caught up in NIL. So it was really good having student athletes there and hearing their experiences, and also having experts in the space. Like we had Instagram there, and they were able to talk about like leveraging their platform and using it. And then we had other representatives there and all these new companies that kind of emerged in the NIL space once they could. And their business models are all about finding ways for student athletes to make money, like through using whatever the service gives. So it was really cool to just see all of the various ways you could use NIL. You can have your own shirts, you can have your own camp, and just it taught us how creative you can get with NIL. So I think that was a really big takeaway for me. And then another one was just really focused on, in the content you're making, try to be as transparent as you can, try to have that branding, make sure you're focusing on content franchises. Like that's something I've known about for a while because I was in Meta's Empower 2.0 program, which was like an NIL incubator for female student athletes. And there was big stress on that, like try to get consistent with your branding and like what you're putting out there. And those are things that are really hard. So it kind of just reminded me of some of these things that I had heard a while back, and it redirected my focus where I was like, I just need to be intentional with what I'm posting. It's super easy to get a video and you're like, okay, that works, and you upload it, but then it kind of dilutes your brand or confuses your audience. So just really being super intentional and focused, and just knowing that NIL doesn't happen like just like that.
So when it comes to NIL, is there anything more that you want to see from it? Is there anything that maybe they could change that would better benefit the college athletes in the space?
Yeah, I think I would just reiterate what I said earlier about just the regulation and having it be consistent. Mm-hmm. I know that's been like a frustrating aspect for me sometimes, just like even in my own experience where gymnasts can go post NIL things in their gym. And I can't do that here because we can't have like Michigan intellectual property and things like that. And some of those are Michigan's rules, like the school, some of it's state rules. So there's a lot of just legal aspects, and I could say just like overall structure that I think needs to be put in place. And I also think this will help like with recruiting and things like this. Like there's not supposed to be pay for play. NIL is definitely going to continue up that alley. It's going to reach that point if there's no one regulating it and there's no actual consequences for when you step out of the bounds of NIL. So I'd say that's the biggest thing, where I just don't think there's a ton of regulation. It's still very new, so I understand it, but I think that that's something that needs to be a priority moving forward.
Is there any specific regulation that you might have in mind, even if it's, just loose terms as of right now, that you think might be beneficial?
I don't know if I have anything specific right now, but I guess like the piece that I just talked about right there is just like school to school, where are you able to post? Like, because I think so much of what we do is on social media. Like that's probably 99% of NIL deals. So even in that space, putting people on the same playing field, okay, you're able to do these things in your facilities, you're not able to do these things in your facilities. I think it will help even out the playing field just a little bit, because right now, to me, it feels like there's some schools that are like super pro NIL. There's other ones that are a little bit more reserved. And that right there is already going to start to create an imbalance in terms of like where recruits are going. Because if you can get a full ride at both, they're also going to go to the school where they can make more money.
And yeah, I like that. So before we close out, is there any last tips and tricks besides the building of the brand? Is there any tips and tricks that you can give to an athlete in regards to NIL and what they should focus on, or anything that's helped you along the way?
I would say reach out to companies that you're interested in working with, even if you don't have a big following. I haven't had tons of deals necessarily work out with me reaching out, but I think you're at least able to network, meet people. You can even like cold DM companies, and you'll find a lot of times they already have influencer programs and things like that you can kind of get your way into. Because I think it's a lot more fun to be a part of NIL when you're advocating for companies and brands that you truly like. So you might not necessarily love these companies that are coming into you, but if you're really excited about representing X product or company that you use on a daily basis, you're going to be more excited about it, and you actually might be willing to be paid less. I'm not encouraging anyone to get paid less, but in that sense, like you're going to be more excited. It won't feel like work. And I think that's one of the keys to NIL, is just making sure you're doing things you want to do. It's going to feel like a chore. It's going to add stress if you're doing these deals that you're not actually really bought into.
Well, thank you so much, Siera, for joining. And look, if you haven't already, go ahead and make sure that you follow her on all social media platforms, because her content truly is amazing. Just seeing kind of her journey and how she's not only just perfecting her craft, but how she's a very team player is inspirational to see. And if you haven't already, go ahead and make sure you like and subscribe to this channel, and we'll see you next week for more.